All right, well, camera guy, you get ready to start? All right, let's get started because I want to kind of run through these slides. All right, so welcome to my talk, the best conventions other teams are using that you need to know, which I heard from some guy. My name is Steve Nolte, but I'm by no means an expert on this subject. I just selfishly want to do a talk on these kinds of things because I find them fascinating. And there's a lot of really cool things going on in the Perl community and also other communities, not just Perl, that I think everyone should know about. And that's one of the reasons I come to YAPC. I want to hear what other people are doing. So for my day job, I work at Assurance, where I lead a dev team of Perl developers on a modern web application. And also living in Milwaukee, I resurrected the Milwaukee Perl Mongers about 3 years ago, and has been going strong. So a quick shout out to all those people that gave a remote talk for our Mongers group. It's been a great way to get great speakers. So like I said, I want to run through these slides and then hopefully reserve some time at the end for comments and also excuses, because what I found out in my research was that there's a lot of cool tools, but there's a lot of excuses for reasons not to use them. So I want to hear what your excuses are. So the obvious question, why do we need conventions? Simple answer is there's problems. We're not perfect. So the idea is conventions help us stay on track, stay on the same page. And so what are some of the problems that we run up against? I think this guy embodies some of those problems. He thinks he knows more than he does. He writes some weird things. You'll see him write things like a map in void context. It's just kind of confusing. Dangerous things like conditional declarations. And autoload. Why? If anyone has a good use for autoload, let me know. I'm sure there is something, but it's just confusing. So a friend of mine gave a really good way to put this. Using tools is a great way to avoid holy wars, and that's going to be a recurring theme to this talk. And so if you haven't guessed by now, the obvious answer to all those first three problems is using Perl Critic. I'm sure some of you are about to puke after all the times you've heard Perl Critic talked about this conference, but it really is a great tool. And of course, right in core, there's 3 policies that right off the bat will warn you about those things I showed before. But I can't stress enough that there's so much more than Perl or than the core inside of Perl Critic. Check out all the different policies there are out there. I mean, I learned this week that Booking is working on their own policies. And if you go to Task Perl Critic, the module, you'll see a package. You'll see all these other links to the other great policies that are available to you. Now, notice I said available to you. There's absolutely no reason to use all these different policies, but pick and choose which ones you like. I think you'll find something that's going to fit almost everything you're concerned about. Well, maybe not. The other comment that always comes up is Perl Tidy. Obviously, I'm not going to go through all the different bells and whistles you can tweak to make Perl Tidy work for you, but one thing I thought I would take the opportunity to point out is that everyone knows how Perl Tidy does a great job of spacing things. So when you have a line of code like this, it does a great job of now expanding things to have a consistent spacing around the parentheses and the parameters, right? But also you can influence the way Perl Tidy works. And I'm sure a lot of you know this, but in case you don't. So in this case, I put a line break after the comma. And now Perl Tidy is influenced by that. And so now when I format my code, it does actually retain that line break. And now we can actually have consistent spacing because I really like having, in my DBS class, relationships to find the name on the first line and then the actual explicit declaration on the second line. But sometimes it gets really annoying the way Perl Tidy does things because in my column definitions, for example, I try to influence it with a line break. But then do you know what happens when you format this code? It actually gets slurped right back up into the previous line. So that gets really annoying. So my tip, if you guys ever have that problem, is just put an extra line break in there, and it actually does get respected by Perl Tidy, and then it'll stay there. So. So, in my research, I did a little bit of researching by sending out a survey to a bunch of my friends, and they sent it to their friends and came back with results. One of the kind of surprising things was that, we had a lot of people who use Perl Tidy and Perl Critic. They use it once in a while, but it's not enforced by their team. The actual number of people that actually use it and enforce it is very, very small. And then there's just an overwhelming majority of people who just don't use it at all. But everyone knows about it. So again, I'm really trying to figure out where's that happy medium where you want to enforce things but not get in people's way. So a lot of the excuses I heard were oh, it's too slow. And I totally agree with that. There's some plugins for Vim that can do automatic real-time Perl Critic checking, for example, when you save your file. But if you work on a project anywhere the size of mine, it just takes 5 seconds, and that's just way too long to run a Perl Critic. You don't want to wait that long. Or maybe 5 seconds is long for you. maybe we just have too much code. But another excuse is that we have a lot of legacy code that has never gone through any kind of Perl Critic policy checks. So now every time I run my Perl Critic on this code, it complains about things from years ago. And so I don't have a lot of good suggestions on that, and I'm really interested in any suggestions that people have. The only thing I could come up with is try to come up with like a new way to put functionality in new classes or roles that you then bring in so that that new package is able to be checked with Perl Critic from the start. Some other excuses for not using Perl Tidy: it makes for some really noisy diffs. Yeah, you can't argue with that, but what we always tell our teammates is that if you're working with some legacy code, make a separate commit for the Perl Critic, the Perl Tidy, because then you don't do any functional changes. People can just ignore that part of the code review and then do your separate functional changes in a separate commit. And then finally, just if you are just really kind of, you can't match the existing formatting, sometimes it's just time to rip off the Band-Aid and just do a mass Perl Tidy. Obviously that doesn't work for everything, but see what works. It's important to point out there's a lot of cool things in other communities. And it's actually kind of interesting to see, like, when I talk to people about Python and JavaScript, it's very well known that they have some standards that are followed by a lot of their community members. In Python, there's PEP8. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of that, and they have tools like Flake8 to enforce those things, it's just kind of surprising. I think we need to be more proud of the tools that we have in Perl, like Perl best practices, which, sure, it's dated, and there's been talks this week already talking about some updates that should be made, but we have some really great tools that we should be proud of, and it's too bad that people stop talking about them. I think that's the only reason why people think the other tools are better, is just there's more communication going on. But yeah. So how do we actually enforce some of these things? Number one, you have to configure it. If you don't get everyone on the same page and configure it, well, then you just have the problem where people don't know what to follow. So one surprising thing that I found is that a lot of people do not commit their config files into their repository. So can I get a quick survey? How many people actually commit their critic policies and tidies into their repository? So that's kind of what I thought. A very small number. I mean, why not? I mean, if you're going to encourage your team to do it the same way, get that config into the repository, then there's no excuse. So now there's some other things that you come across, like, for example, we have a lot of YAML files that we use for seed data with our database. There's really not a formatter that will automatically format it unless I'm missing something, but there's a great plugin out there, or a plugin framework called Editor Config. It works with just about all the most useful editors out there, where you can actually define one config file, and all the editors are automatically configured to do the same, spaces or tabs, your choice. How do you want to display the indent size of your tabs? So no more arguing over tabs versus spaces. It just does it for you. And so again, just commit that into your repository. And now the thing is, though, you have to make people use it, though. So the obvious solution here that a lot of people who do enforce it are using these get pre-commit hooks to make sure that people follow these policies, right? But the thing is, on our team, we have some get pre-commit hooks that are available, but in talking to my developers, they don't always even set them up. So you have to make sure not only is it easy to set up, it's super easy to set up, and also make sure they actually do it, because even though it's there, you can't guarantee they do it. One thing that I haven't found is a way to automatically set up these Git hooks. Has anyone found a way to automatically set up Git hooks when you either clone a repository or pull down commits? If anyone knows of anything, I'd love to hear about it, because it's just not automatic yet. So that'd be kind of cool to hear about something. And so then also consider a framework that makes it super easy to write your hooks. There's one I found called app Git hooks. I can't pronounce his name, so I'm sorry, but it's French. And he has hooks to configure all the different Git hooks, and then you can just write Perl code to do it. And I think it looks really pretty with these nice, it shows you verbosely what it's doing, so it makes you comfortable and feel good knowing that it's doing different things. And one of my favorite plugins that it has is the ability to check that your commit messages actually have a ticket ID with them. And so that brings me into my next topic. You get guys like this who just love computering all day, and they're just commit happy, they're committing all the time, but they get kind of sloppy. No one's really double checking how their commit messages look. So it starts with a ticketing system, though. Everyone has a ticketing system for the most part. These are the most popular ones that I saw in my research. We use Jira at my company. I have a special place in my heart for Pivotal Tracker. I think they do some great things, but all these things have the same feature. They have a ticket ID number, right? And so almost everyone I talk to has the same kind of concept, where when you work on a ticket, you make a separate branch for that ticket. And then a A lot of people also use a nice prefix. The prefix is great for being able to quickly find the branches you're looking for and also triggering your build system to find which branches automatically build, or lots of different reasons. But with that ticket ID, that's where you can actually start doing some nice things. In general, though, what I found was like most people are using the GitFlow model. How many people know the GitFlow branching model? Okay, the majority of you. I'll skip over explaining this. One thing I'll point out, though, is that my team found that a nice tweak to this model is that instead of branching off of the develop branch, kind of the melting pot for the next release, we instead branch off of master. The reason for that is if you ever have any kind of feature or bug fix that has to get reverted from the next release, if you're branching off of another branch that has all those melting pot commits, well, now you've polluted every other branch that started from that melting pot branch. If you start from master, which represents everything that's currently in production, there's no risk of polluting your other branches because that cleanup is just ridiculous. If you want to follow GitFlow specifically, you can use tools like git-flow, which is a nice command line interface to using these rules. It has all sorts of nice little helpers. I personally don't care for it because I like knowing what I'm doing with Git, but it's there for you if you want to have some training wheels. But then when you start talking about like commit conventions, it's really big on my team that we actually use the same style for the messages. And it is also apparent in a lot of other teams as well. There's a nice blog post by Tim Pope, who was talking about what's a really good format for the messages. And the most important things I found were that the subject line needs to be very short. If you can't fit the description of your commit in 50 to 69 characters, chances are really good you need to make a separate commit because it's too big. But then also the imperative mood is super important on my team. What that means is that instead of saying like fixed a bug or something like that, you're saying like update preferences to match whatever feature. That mood, that imperative mood, is used by other automatic Git commits or Git commit messages. And so when you keep it consistent, not just between yourself and Git and all your developers, it just makes it so much easier to read across the board. And finally, that ticket number is so important. You got to make sure that ticket number for whatever tracking system you have is in that commit message. So how do you enforce that? Again, back to the commit pre-commit hook stuff. There's a lot of other tools on CPAN that do similar things, but you got to make sure you do that ticket validation. That, I think, is the most important thing. And not just simple ticket validation where you pull the ticket ID from the branch. I think a lot of people use that technique where, oh, my ticket ID is in the branch, let's automatically dump it into my commit message. You need to do live ticket analysis, where is this ticket truly something that's checked out to me and something for me to work on? If you don't do that and you commit the wrong ticket number, which my team has done all the time, you can't rewrite history. So now when you're going back to look at the previous mistakes or not mistakes, but you're blaming the code to see what happened in the past. If you got the wrong ticket number, you can't go back to the right source of that change. So really make sure that you have some actual decent checking of those ticket numbers. Also remotely, what I was talking about is just local, but you can use the pre-receive hooks on your Git hosting server. We use Stash, which is now called Bitbucket. They merged the two. You can have these plugins that automatically verify that whatever commits are being pushed, you make sure that they're tickets that are real tickets, and then it'll just completely say, sorry, we're not going to receive your push because you got the wrong tickets. Then just rebase your code, fix those commits, and you're good to go. Also, there's another tool out there I found on CPAN. There's tons of tools, but this one sounded kind of cool. If you're familiar with Code Tidy All, anyone not familiar with Code Tidy All? Sorry, not familiar with Code Tidy All? I bet you guys aren't? Oh, okay. Code Tidy All is kind of like a tool that encompasses pretty much all the different formatters you could think of. So it does not only Perl and Perl Critic, but also JavaScript, and I think it does CSS. It's kind of like a way to just say, don't make me think, just tidy everything for me. And so there's actually another piece of that you can install on your host to say, whatever config I have for Code Tidy All, which encompasses all those different tools, make sure that before I push my code, it makes sure that passes. But my favorite part, not only does it verify that, it has a safety, because sometimes you just can't make sure everything matches the configs you have in place. If you push the same thing 3 times, it says, okay, fine, I get it. I know it, you know what you're doing. It just lets you do it. So it's kind of a cool feature. And so now we're getting into the idea of like pull requests, peer review, because static analysis can only get you so far. LGTM, that's a common acronym that companies like Google will use for peer review. It's got to look good to me, because one major reason is going to be catching bugs earlier on makes them easier to solve, right? His name's Bruce Johnson. He works at Full Story now. He used to work at Google. He wrote a really great article on why peer review is important. This is a sweet graph that came from that article, just kind of showing like how much time you save the earlier you catch a bug. This was actually calculated from a study that was done a long time ago. I don't need to get into details, but it just really is, it's a good reminder of how the faster you can catch a bug, the more time you save later. But again, readability is huge. If there's one thing that I want you guys to leave with in this talk is that peer review is meant for good readability. At the big G, Google, what they have are people that are promoted to the status of readability experts. They're not there to find bugs in your code or not necessarily even find security problems, but they're experts in the language who have proven them worthy of being able to determine whether or not the code you write is easy to read. Because that's so important 6 months from now. Can you quickly understand what that code is doing? And so you have people that approve your code for readability reasons, but then you also have people that approve your code because they're owners of that project. You have two types of reviewers. So there's lots of high-level tools that you can also use to manage peer review and pull requests. Grand Street Group has built a sweet set of tools called Git-C. You can go check that out. They have this concept of change sets where they have tools that manage all of them. And then a really kind of cool tool that I just found out about recently is called Codacy. It's a website where it's kind of like Travis, for example, where it watches your repo and then checks your code for all those policies. So notice it supports all these different languages, Java, JavaScript, PHP, Python. But embarrassingly, it even supports CSS, but not Perl. So I was actually in talks with one of the guys who works at Codacy. He's a great Perl dev, and he's actually working on getting some support for Perl, so look for that in the future. So now you got to think about, why do we care about readability? Because how many of you have come across code that says, how did this ever work? You know, it's embarrassing, but it happens. So you're always looking at, how do you make this easier to debug? And I think one of the most important things that you can do as a team is log consistently. One of the tools that we love to use is log-any. The reason we use it is because it has a very nice interface. You can do things like easy sprintf type of logging where all the debug error warn fatals, they have an F at the end as well for a method where it just automatically does a data dump on that data structure. Or another nice thing is that if you have an undef value, it actually prints undef in the comment so that you know it was an undef value. So the point is that for our team, we don't want to decide where we send the logs. You just log the same way every time, and then let your application decide where to send those log messages. So under the hood, we also use log for Perl, and then we have a appender that actually sends it off to a service called Graylog. There's been a lot of cool talks in the past that have used different services. We just like to use Graylog because it was easy to set up. It uses Elasticsearch on the back end, so it's nice and fast. But I highly recommend you check out Tim Bunce, who wrote this thing to use an elk stack. So when you're talking about looking for bugs and researching those problems, Stephen Little from Booking, he gave a great suggestion that you want to make your code easy to search. They encourage the grepability of your code base. So when you're looking for something,
modules have been overwhelmed. So there is a preference. You can say, look, I don't do.
What was that? Sorry. Okay. All right. That's weird.
No, it does not answer my question.
Wow. All right. That's crazy. Well, I'll talk louder. So another kind of cool tool we use from the Atlassian framework is a combination of I don't know, but is this microphone working in here?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. All right. Maybe they heard me. But let me just give you a quick slideshow of some of the cool cohesive tools we use from the Atlassian suite. Here we see a pull request. And what's cool is that because we have commit IDs in our ticket numbers in our commits, the links to the Jira tickets are quickly available from the commit history. So then I can quickly link over to Jira. I can see all the details about that ticket. And then also it shows me the status of the builds. So here I can quickly see that this has already been deployed to my model, prod, and sandbox environments. And if I click on the build, it shows me that here's the build ID number that was responsible for including these commits. I can go to the Bamboo service and actually see, oh, yeah, sure enough, here are the issues that were addressed with this build. And then here are the commits that were also included, so I can always do that hot linking between everything. And then same thing, once you go to Stash or Bitbucket to see what those commits are, you see the branches and the builds that were responsible for those as well. All right, so I'm running out of time. One thing is that developers are super lazy. So you got to remember, you have to do something to force these people to follow these conventions. It's not good enough to just talk about it. So you have to do things like practice these things. Are you sure that people on your team actually know how to do an interactive rebase? Do they know how to chunk a commit? All these different things that help make commits more readable. Force them to prove to you that they can actually do those things. And then the other thing that I think is overlooked too often is praising people for good work. I highly recommend trying to find a badge system, kind of like what Stack Overflow does. The more times you help people, the better badges you get. So again, nothing is going to be useful unless you actually make tools to make it work. So remember, do whatever works for your team, because there's no way that everything is going to be the same for everyone. So I'm out of time, but I'm going to steal some time to see if there's anyone that has some excuses that they want to share or some other suggestions, because again, these are only things that I heard. I learned a lot of cool things this week. So, Todd.
You were asking about the Perl Critic problem with legacy code.
Yeah.
We have a policy in our linter that we have a different policy for an existing file versus a new file.
How do you switch between which ones you use? Is that automatic?
The linter lives outside of that, so it runs Perl Critic on each file individually. So it says it looks in the commit and can see, okay, that's a new file.
Nice.
Yeah.
So what Todd is saying, he's got separate Perl Critic policies for old code and new code, which is a great idea. Yeah.
To go further, basically, if it was in this, if the file existed in this particular branch, then it's legacy. Otherwise, it's new.
Oh, okay. So using branches to separate what's legacy.
Then it meant that it was legacy.
Gotcha.
Stephen, in his talk, addressing exactly the same thing, talked about a tool they've written, which they plan to open source, which is called Patch Critic.
Yeah.
It just looks at the diff and then does the critic on that.
Yeah, what he said was there's a tool that Booking's working on called Patch Critic. Look for that to be open sourced on CPAN pretty soon. It sounds like it does a great job of just doing isolated critic checks, not on the whole file.
On that same theme, Perl Critic colons progressive is intended for that.
Progressive too. Perl Critic : progressive has some tools to help with that as well. That's great. Yeah.
So just on the Git messages,
Yeah.
I'm with Git in the code bases and commit messages generally out with the tracking systems. So it's a good idea to put the issue in the roadmap, but bear that in mind when you're writing a Git message that you might want to describe some of the issues.
Yeah, exactly. I hate hearing about teams who just make a commit message with nothing more than the ticket number, because they say, oh, you can find all about the problem in the ticket. Like you said, your ticketing system might not be the same ticketing system next year. Sure, you might have some hot links to take you to the new system, but when you're looking at a Git blame, it's so much more efficient just to read what's going on in the commit message instead of having to go find somewhere in a giant ticket.
Yeah, our branches, we actually specifically recommend against using the ticket number in a branch and try and describe what the branch is actually for, and we prefix with squad names.
What kind of names?
Squad names, so a squad is a subgroup of developers that are working on something.
Ah, gotcha. What else? Yeah.
I'd like a separate round of applause for somebody who resurrected a Perlmongers group.
Yeah, and I can't say enough how awesome it's been. I think I've asked about a dozen different Perl people in the community to give a talk at the Milwaukee Perlmongers. Not a single one of them said no. And they've just joined us on Google Hangouts. A lot of them had prepared talks ahead of time that they've given at other Monger groups. And so it's like no prep time that they need at all. So if you have a Mongers group that's kind of desperate for, not desperate, but kind of thirsty for some new speakers, highly recommend just reaching out to someone who's willing to go on Google Hangouts.
We need to clear out so they can move the wall.
Okay. Thanks so much for your time, guys.